I spent 20 years building a life that felt solid enough to trust my weight to. We met in college when everything still smelled like possibility. She told me she was a virgin, and I, for reasons I can't fully explain even now, took that as a soft kind of promise. I liked that about her, her modesty, the way she seemed to move through the world with a private reserve. I had more experience than she did, sure. But experience is not the same as intimacy, and for a long time I thought we were making something that mattered. We married, had 2 kids, and settled into the slow rhythms of adult life. Jobs, mortgage payments, weekend chores, parents' birthdays. I watched our children grow into teenagers and then into college students. We made it. That was the story I told myself every morning, when I brushed my teeth and watched her at the kitchen sink. Sex was never the wildfire some couples write songs about. It was a reliable ember, once or twice a week, sometimes more, sometimes less. For the early years, it felt like an agreement we both tacitly honored. I usually initiated, she usually complied, and we both left the bedroom with the quiet contentment of people who'd learned to accept what the other offered. She never volunteered. She never asked. There were the few things she absolutely refused. Oral, anything rough, the one time we tried anal 15 years ago, which she said she didn't want to repeat. I remember that night because it stuck in my head as proof that her boundaries were firm, non-negotiable. She disliked dirty talk. She disliked being pushed. She didn't enjoy the aggressive side of sex, and I respected that. I told myself respecting someone meant not trying to rewrite them into someone more exhilarating. Love, I thought, was enough to hold the private corners together. 5 months ago, she took a job that required travel. At first, it was an easy thing to be proud of. Promotions and responsibilities and a new title on her LinkedIn profile. The trips were short, 1 or 2 nights, but frequent. I told myself this was part of modern life, that couples adapt. She seemed energized by the work. She came home with new stories about colleagues, about meetings that had gone well, about hotel food that was unexpectedly good. She was busier, yes, more tired, sometimes distracted, but the surface of our life remained the same. We still had dinner when our schedules aligned. We still cuddled on the couch. She sometimes initiated sex after returning from a trip, and I would smile and take it as proof she missed me. The comfortable belief I was in tune with my wife continued, like a comforting hum in the background of my day. My laptop died on a Tuesday evening while she was at her mother's house, 3 towns over for a couple of days. I needed to pull up a recording of my daughter's graduation speech to send to my sister, so I borrowed her laptop without thinking twice. We had shared passwords for years. Everything was as it always had been. I typed MP4 into the search bar, half remembering the names of old files. The first few results were what I expected. Birthday clips, awkward family videos, a shaky recording of the kids building a backyard fort. Then one file grabbed my attention because the thumbnail showed her. Not the candid, fully clothed moments I was accustomed to, but a still image of her in a hotel room, bare the sheets rumpled around her. My first stupid, hopeful thought was that perhaps she had made something private for me and then never sent it, an experiment, a curiosity she'd abandoned. I clicked it. The video started with a static, voyeuristic angle. She lay on the bed, and for a suspended moment I thought about the private, silly ways couples create memories, stupid wedding videos, half-finished home movies. Then the camera moved and a new perspective revealed another person in the frame. It was a man. The room was obviously not ours. The kind of recognition that follows a sudden punch to the gut came a beat later. Because it wasn't graphic in the way I had braced for, it was worse. It was intimate in the way 2 people know each other, in the way each action answered an unspoken cue. She was different in those clips, animated, expressive in a way that had never been for me. The first video was only one in a folder that contained 10 more. I watched them because I felt sick, because I needed to understand whether this image was a trick of light, a face that merely resembled my wife. Each video showed different rooms, different hotel environments, sometimes a desk with a business card on it visible, sometimes a skyline outside the window. The durations varied, starts and stops and awkward pauses that made it clear. These were not polished productions, but real-time recordings. In each of them she was engaged, present, and significantly more adventurous than she had ever been with me. The specifics of what she did mattered less than the sheer contrast. Things she had refused to do with me, things she had never hinted at even in years of private conversations. She performed in front of a camera and with a partner who knew her rhythm and, apparently, her vocabulary. She laughed and spoke in ways I had never heard her speak. She smiled with an openness that was new to me. Felt an internal collapse, old metaphors fall apart in the face of something. Raw, like a house that looks sound from the outside, but you find rotten timbers when you poke behind the drywall. I replayed scenes in my head of our marriage, the dinners, the long drives, how she used to lean into me on the couch, and with each memory my certainty cracked further. It was not the sexual acts themselves that destroyed me. It was the evidence of a secret identity, an emotional life parallel to mine, thriving and illuminated. The deeper blow was the obvious joy on her face. She looked alive in a way I had never witnessed. The idea that the woman who had, for 2 decades, consumed herself with family and prudence and modesty, could harbor such different urges hurt more than I can say. I closed the laptop with shaking hands and sat in the quiet of the kitchen, the ordinary hum of the refrigerator suddenly hostile. My heart beat hard enough to make the cabinets rattle. Tears came not in theatrical waves but as tight hot pins behind my eyes. Part of me wanted to throw the laptop across the room. Part wanted to burn it. Part wanted to call her mother and scream until my lungs burned. Mostly I felt dizzy with disbelief. The rational part of me, trained by years of problem solving, in offices and living rooms, knew I should not act on first impulses. I needed evidence, context, a plan. I needed time, so I copied the files to an external drive. I did it with the mechanical precision of someone who had to keep their brain from mutiny. I watched every single clip twice more. Watching them was both an act of cruelty and a desperate attempt at clarity. I cataloged the hotel details, the background noise, the items in the room that might place the time. A business card on the nightstand here, a specific lamp there. I scrolled through our shared email and found travel confirmations that lined up with some of the dates I could infer from the tapes. A sick, cold comprehension arrived. This had started well after she took the new job. The trips were opportunities she used in a way I'd never imagined. I felt a new animal kind of anger rise. Not the raw animalistic hiss of immediate revenge, but a brittle, hard resolve that something would change irrevocably. In the following days, my routine became surgical. I made copies of everything and stored them on an encrypted drive. I took screenshots of frames where faces were visible and where the man's features were clear. I organized them chronologically as best I could. I printed hotel bookings and matched them to dates when she'd been in towns I didn't know much about. I booked an appointment at a clinic for an STI panel because reality, no matter how much you want to deny it, requires facing consequences. The wait for that test felt both fatalistic and necessary. If I was to reconstruct my future, I needed a practical accounting of what had been risked. They say betrayal isolates you, and they're right. I found myself walking through the house as if someone else had redesigned it overnight. I could not look at the family photos without seeing in the corners of each smile that I had been betrayed by someone who knew how to compartmentalize. I kept replaying moments of our life for clues. Was there a tone of voice I missed? A sigh that had sounded like exhaustion but actually was longing? I asked myself a different question each hour and never answered one rightly. The kids were away at college. That tiny mercy meant I could keep some of the truth contained for the moment. I knew I owed them the truth, but not until I had a plan that didn't leave their lives scattered. Confrontation felt like a theater I didn't want to perform in. I imagined the scenes 1,000 ways. Screaming matches that would end with her shrugging and offering an excuse I couldn't believe. Long, tearful sessions where we tried to salvage something that couldn't be put back together. The small, humiliating pleas for the kind of reconciliation I didn't want to seek. Instead, I made a quieter choice. I called a lawyer and asked for an initial consult. That call made the betrayal move from the realm of private suffering to legal reality. The attorney's voice was efficient and mild, and in having a third party register what I'd discovered, I felt oddly steadied. She advised me to gather everything, to be meticulous, because the more concrete I could make this web of evidence, the more secure my options would be. I listened and did as suggested. I also began to do the small, practical things people do when they have to change the architecture of their life. I updated passwords, transferred money into accounts she didn't know about, changed where automatic bills would draw from. I took boxes to a storage unit and, more painfully, I took the things that housed 20 years of comfort, old letters, a stack of holiday cards, away and placed them in a car trunk, feeling each item become a severed limb. I told myself I was doing this to protect myself, to ensure there would be no possibility of being blindsided by a phone call in the middle of the night telling me our joint accounts had been drained. The work was tedious and small, but it steadied me. It gave me something to do with hands that had otherwise trembled with anger or despair. I reached out to a close friend, someone who'd watched our marriage from other angles. I told him only that I needed company and perhaps counsel. I did not divulge the specifics yet, not because I wanted secrets, but because I wanted a measured witness. He visited, bought coffee, listened. He was a calm mirror, soft questions, no presumptions. In his presence, I could map the emotional coordinates of the trauma in a way that made it less monstrous. Later, I called my mother. That call was messy and human. She cried, I swallowed, and we agreed she would be a fallback for our kids should things get messy. The attempt to build a human net was not a sentimentality I had room for. It was strategic but also necessary. We are made for other people to hold us when our foundation collapses. 3 days after I first discovered the videos, I decided on a course. I would leave when she returned from her mother's house. Not a dramatic, television-worthy flight. No outbursts in a driveway or a final throw of dishes. I wanted silence. I wanted the clarity of absence to land as its own consequence. I would take my things, secure my accounts, and begin the legal steps. She would return to an empty house and then to the paperwork that would let reality invade her privacy and force reckonings she had avoided. The plan felt cruel in its execution, but to me proportionate to the betrayal. On the night before she returned, I packed 3 suitcases. I packed for a life that would not include ritual weekend coffee and shared chores. I packed for a life that might include therapy and quiet mornings that weren't earned by reconciliation. I left a letter on the kitchen table, not an explanation, not a confession, but a measured notice. I wrote that I had found things that could not be ignored and that I had secured legal help. The words trembled when I wrote them. Anger, even the cold kind I had cultivated, does not erase grief. I did not tell her where I was going. I wanted her to feel what I had felt, the unmooring, the absence, the slow dawning that the person you had been with was not who you believed. When she returned, her text at noon read like a small, startled bird. Where are you? I thought you'd be home. Everything okay? I let the phone light blink away into silence. I watched her messages increase in clarity and then in desperation. Please call me. Why did you leave my things? Anyone can explain. 2 hours later, a courier came to our house with the divorce paperwork. Along with the petition was a binder I had assembled. The videos cataloged by date, screenshots, hotel bookings correlated with travel confirmations. The binder was clinical. It did not contain the raw battering that had been my night since the discovery. It contained facts. The effectiveness of that cool documentation as a form of revenge surprised me. Revenge tastes like completeness. By presenting the evidence, I ensured the story would not be told as a he said, she said one in the early stages. It had the plainness of someone who had been meticulous, no theatrics, only undeniable detail. Her reaction was brutal in its own currency. The first voicemail I listened to was a thin, pitched thing I barely recognized as her voice. She sounded panicked and incredulous. Please come home, she said. We need to talk. You can't just leave. Later, there were calls that switched from pleading to angry to baffled accusations. How could I do this? Why would I orchestrate such a thing? What evidence did I even have? She blamed me in part, as if my leaving were the provocation. People do a strange inventory after infidelity is revealed. Blame is often the first currency exchanged. I did not respond to any of her attempts to reach me. I had learned from a past marriage to a neighbor's acquaintance and from my own messy experiments with conflict that replying in the heat of the moment often becomes the story someone else will tell. Silence was my counsel here. Once the legal wheels began to turn, the world rearranged in small public ways. Attorneys exchanged letters. There were custody considerations to discuss, even though our children were legally adults. The emotional impact and financial entanglements demanded attention. Bank managers were polite and businesslike, moving assets and ensuring protections. The man who had appeared in the films remained, for the time being, a shadow in other people's evidence, but an important one. How long had the affair been going? Were there more secrets? He was not a character I needed to confront to effect change. The fact of his presence had already catalyzed the decisions I made. People close to me asked what I wanted: revenge, reconciliation, something softer. My answers changed with the day. Early on, revenge felt like a bomb. I wanted her to flinch in the way my heart had flinched. I wanted the floor of her life to feel as brittle as mine had been. Later, I realized what I wanted was not purely punitive. I wanted truth. I wanted to know how long someone could live a double life and keep loving two different realities. I wanted to dismantle the illusion that the household we had constructed was still theirs together. There is a peculiar kind of exhaustion that comes when the machinery of anger is turned on too long. It burns out your energy and leaves you with ash. There were moments, small and human, that complicated the narrative. I thought about the early days, the quiet mornings when she brewed coffee for me without being asked. The way she would fold my shirts with a meticulousness bordering on affection. Those memories did not vanish because of the betrayal. They complicated me. They made my mornings heavier with both the weight of loss and the recognition that people hold multitudes. I could name without shame the tenderness she had offered over the years. But tenderness cannot be the entire ledger if there has been a second life. My moral calculus had shifted. Someone can be kind and also be dishonest. Those two statements can be true at once, and holding both truths did not alleviate the ache. I saw her once in court during an early procedural hearing. She had tried to file a counterclaim initially, perhaps to complicate my narrative, but the facts were arranged against her. She looked small and exposed in the fluorescent light, mascara rimmed below her eyes, the strain of the last weeks visible in the slump of her shoulders. I felt a flicker of something I could not name: remorse, shock, a trace of our old life. The courthouse has a way of forcing the private into the very public. Neighbors mattered, lawyers mattered, and the inexorable machine of legal process marched forward. In private, I went to therapy. I had been raised to manage feelings in silence. Tears were something you outsourced to the privacy of your pillow, but sitting across from a therapist and speaking aloud what had happened felt like reassemblage. I learned to uncouple the humiliation from the facts, to let grief be its own shape rather than the loud, righteous roar of revenge. That did not make me soft. It made me more functional, and in the messy work of divorce, functional is valuable. I learned that healing is not a single victory but an accumulation of small compromises with yourself. A morning without wanting to check her phone, a night where sleep came before the mind rehearsed betrayal, a meal eaten without the hollow echo of what used to be. Months later, when the legal dust had settled into new foundations, the divorce became final. We divided property, discussed the logistics of shared accounts, and wrestled with the thorny matter of retirement assets. There were moments where she reached out, not in the raw way of the early voicemails, but with a quieter attempt at explanation. I heard about loneliness on the road, about feeling seen in ways she had not felt at home, about a slow erosion of small attentions that made the excitement of being with someone new feel like a rebirth. None of those truths softened my conviction that the forms of intimacy she sought should have been able to be brokered at home. Her explanations landed like water on a stone. They soaked in but did not alter the structure underneath. 14 months after the first discovery, I sat at a small table near a window watching leaves fall. The kids visited sometimes, bringing bright news of internships and lives in progress. I was rebuilding, not triumphantly, but with a quiet dignity. Occasionally I would think of the videos and feel the old corrosive anger like a phantom pain, but it was rarer now. Revenge had been a tool I used, not because I enjoyed the harm, but because I needed to reassert agency. In the cold arithmetic of legal settlements and moved possessions, agency was what remained. People ask me sometimes whether the bitterness ever goes away. It changes form. The first months were a raw, constant ache. Later came righteous fury. Later still, a hollow clarification. I had been deceived, and the world felt more brittle for it. Now the emotion has taken on a quieter tone. I feel annoyance at memory, relief at distance, and a readiness to be surprised by life again. I am not sure what will come next in love. Maybe I will meet someone who values the ordinary ember of intimacy as highly as I do. Maybe I will stay solitary and find peace in routines that need no explanations. Both possibilities now feel available, and that choice is, in some strange way, a reward for having moved through the wreckage. If there is one honest thing to say about betrayal, it is that it forces a reckoning with truth. You either sit inside a lie because it is comfortable, or you tear the room apart to find out what the foundations really are. I chose the latter. It cost me intimacy, reputation, and the easy domesticity I had loved. But it offered something else: the clarity of autonomy and the ability to decide what kind of life I will not be lied into again. The revenge I served was not theatrical. It was a slow, careful reclaiming of my future. It was proof, both to her and to myself, that a life built on secrecy cannot stand when someone else learns how to read the floor plan. My story is not one about heroism. It is about a man who loved, who was betrayed, who chose a shape of retaliation that preserved his dignity and moved him toward healing. I tell it not to inflame or shame, but to say what is true. Betrayal is a rupture that takes time to repair, and sometimes repair means walking away. If anything resonates, perhaps it is this: the cruelest part of betrayal is not the act itself, but the recalibration of trust afterwards. Rebuilding that trust with yourself and with the people around you takes patience, help, and the courage to live with imperfect answers.